Okay. Shannon, welcome. The last time we saw each other was in the Bay Area at one of the Women in AI at its gatherings. I believe that was at Salesforce. So much has changed since then. You had published one book and now you published another one. Just so folks who have not picked up her book yet, it's fantastic. It has been, I enjoyed it so much, and I'm so glad you wrote this book because it's so needed at this time because we are overwhelmed with so much hype about AI. We do need smart and brilliant women like yourself to be helping us push back with what is real, what isn't. So I'll jump right into it. Again, folks, we will not have Q&A at the end, so do follow Shannon, Professor Vallor on LinkedIn, and please engage with her work. So without further ado, my first question for you is your core premise of this book is AI systems as a mirror of ourselves. You've said that AI is being developed in harmful ways, not because it's misaligned with our human values, but it's rather expressing those values all too well. So can you help us understand? Because we've been hearing from a lot of other folks, the men in the space, who are promoting this idea that we should reconcile with the values alignment piece, that is what they are working on. So can you help us understand, reconcile these two points of views and how we should think about it?
Absolutely. So when I wrote the book, The AI Mirror, it was inspired by the enthusiastic response I'd received to a lot of talks that I'd given using the mirror as a metaphor to understand what large data-driven machine learning AI models were doing, and to help people cut through the hype and understand what these models do, what they don't do, what's real and what's not in the media hype around these technologies. And so many people found that metaphor helpful. And of course, no metaphor is perfect, so they aren't literally mirrors. And if you push on this metaphor, eventually you'll see its limits. But people found it such a helpful metaphor, and far less likely to mislead people than the other metaphor that conventionally gets used, which is the metaphor of a mind, where we're led initially to use the mind as a way to understand what these tools do. And then very quickly, it's easy to slide into making the mistake that these are minds. So to unpack the metaphor a little bit, the basic idea is that what these tools do is gather all of the patterns from the data that have been ingested, that have been fed to these models by the engineers, data which is entirely scraped from human outputs, from the books we've written, the Reddit posts we've made, the speeches that we've given, right? The images that we've created. All of that is scraped, fed into the model. And what the model does is extract the most dominant patterns and use those patterns to predict outputs that should follow from prompts that are given to it. So in a way, what it's doing is what a mirror does when it collects light, analyzes through the kind of process of the physics of a mirror surface. It picks up the properties of the physical light and then reflects it back to us in images, in a mirror. Well, when you're talking to a large language model online, in a way, you're talking to a mirror that reflects an aggregate set of patterns from this vast corpus of human-generated data. Now, that's where the illusion of intelligence comes in. That's where the illusion that there's a person or an entity or a mind on the other side. It's because it's reflecting back your own mind and the minds of everyone else whose data has been sucked into this model. So in a way, it's like we're talking to ourselves, but not ourselves as individuals, a sort of aggregated version of humanity. But of course, it doesn't represent all of us equally, right? Who has historically been allowed to have the privilege of having their cultural artifacts preserved in digital form, who has had historically the privilege of writing books, of writing research articles, of making political speeches, and even who has historically had the privilege of having the kind of digital bandwidth to be able to spend all day online making comments, right? So the corpus of training data does not represent humanity. It represents a subset of humanity that has had these kinds of privileges. On top of that, these models do not represent all of the different patterns and traits, even of the people in the training data, because what they're designed to do is to find the strongest and most dominant patterns within those data, which will necessarily, again, favor those styles of speaking, those thought patterns, and those values and judgments that are most heavily represented. And again, we know that's most likely to be men. It's most likely to be highly educated people in the West. It's most likely to be people who are neurotypical. It's most likely to, right? So we can go down the list, but these are the patterns that are being reflected back to us. So when you then ask the question of, well, how will we get these models to align with our values? What I say is, well, first of all, we should be pointing out that these already align with a certain subset of human values. The question is, whose values are those? How representative are they of the broad stakeholders that are being affected by these tools? And the answer is, they're not representing us very equitably, but they are already very well aligned with a certain dominant set of values and judgments that they reproduce over and over again. And in my book, I talk about the ways in which that is, in fact, the deep danger that we're not paying attention to. Not that these things are going to go sideways and reflect values that have never been seen in human life before, but rather that they're going to force us to narrowly fixate and reproduce over and over again the most dominant values that have already brought us to a very unequal, unjust, and unsustainable world. So value alignment is a technical project of trying to control AI systems by making sure that they only reproduce behavior that aligns with the values that we have, but that we is software engineers working for big tech, right? Now, I don't want to dismiss the whole project of value alignment, because it is true that these systems can behave unpredictably. And we do have problems when we do have a legitimate use case for these technologies. There are challenges with making those systems robust and predictable and safe enough that we can rely on them in high stakes situations. And so we could think about value alignment as a very limited technical project of making machines more controllable and predictable. But it's not a solution to making these systems ethical for the reasons that I've articulated. Oh, I can't hear you, Mia.
Thank you so much. Yes, I like what you said. There's so many nuggets there that really stood out for me. One is whose values. So that's one. And it's the dominant groups who are represented, and those values are reflected. So it is a mirror, but it's a mirror for them as to they are projecting their values. And we keep seeing that over and over again, that projection of they are first positioning of these boxes as being magical or something that just happens. Like these are not machines that just occur. Like we don't find them in nature. They're not sitting hanging on trees. They're not natural things. This is something that's built by humans, and the humans who are building them, predominantly men, are cis white men who are their values are projected into the system. So I love that metaphor so much. It makes so much sense when you think about who is creating these machines and what values are being instilled. So can you help us understand how even rational men, right, the engineer at Google who claimed that the Lambda or the LLM that he's working on is sentient. Can you help us understand, like, how can somebody so logical, smart, and from all accounts, like a very rational human being can come to that conclusion?
Yeah. Well, I think initially that seems very mysterious, right? How could someone who is not naive and who understands the way these systems are put together, and as you say, these are not natural phenomena. They aren't aliens that arrived from outer space. They didn't evolve. They're engineered artifacts, just as mirrors are engineered by human hands, so are these. So how could someone who's been part of that engineering process become genuinely tricked into thinking that they're speaking to a conscious being? So I think there's a few things. First of all, there's the objective fact that it was genuinely surprising to a lot of the tech community that the transformer architecture of these new machine learning models would produce the language capabilities that it did. That is, they were taken aback by their own success. They didn't expect it to work as well as it did. So there's a little bit of just being surprised by what you've built overperforming your expectations and then attributing that to something mysterious, right? But I think it's much more than that. It's also because we've been prepared by a century of science fiction that has told us that when artificial intelligence arrives, it will be another mind. We've all, seen Star Trek and Data and all of the other characters that we've loved or feared in fiction that tell us that AI is about producing machine minds, that we're already culturally prepared to expect that outcome. I think another factor is that we all want to see some magic in the world, right? And particularly in the tech world, there is a desire to and a reinforcement of one's power and one's capacity if you think you've built something that is magical in its abilities. And so to believe that you've given birth or helped give birth to a new kind of consciousness, that's a very romantic and appealing idea because it reflects a kind of power that you have. It's not nearly so impressive to tell someone that you've built a fancy mirror out of math, which is what they've done. So I think all of these factors play a role. There's also the natural tendency that we have to anthropomorphize and to expect language to come from a mind. That's very natural. So fortunately, I think there are many fewer technical experts who have fallen into Lemoine's error. Even in the AI research community, I rarely find anyone today who wants to argue that a machine learning model is conscious. So I think, fortunately, that has backed away. But unfortunately, the error has spread among lay people. So when I give talks to wider audiences, there are many people in the audience who believe that they're talking to a machine friend who consciously appreciates them, who consciously cares for them. And that's a very, very dangerous thing. So unfortunately, the error has leaked out of the tech world and into the wider populace. So part of what I'm trying to do with my book is really kind of puncture that illusion, what I call the Narcissus illusion of looking at your own reflection and believing that there's another mind on the other side and bringing us back down to reality.
Thank you so much for doing that. It's so needed, and that is the danger, isn't it? The godfathers, as they're called, of Silicon Valley, of AI, are out there making such pronouncements with such confidence. And even when those are debunked by experts like yourself and so many others, and many of them happen to be women in this field who are debunking, and it literally has become everybody's like side job, or maybe the main job, just keep debunking these. And you're right, it doesn't really reach the audience,
No.
which is, again, I am so grateful that you took the time to come here, talk to our audience today, because this is needed. We need more of that wisdom to be shared. One thing I have noticed, and this is like the light bulb went off, and you said about the vision of AI, how it is, well, AGI, or super intelligent AI, is always framed as this war between humans and machine, and oh, robots are going to kill us. And what does it say about the people who are building this, who are assigning just genocidal tendencies to a machine that they themselves are building? Like, can you help us like understand philosophically, but also psychologically what's going on here?
Yeah, so I have a chapter on this in the book that really looks at the different ideologies and mythologies that we've had around AI for a long time, going all the way back to the 19th century and Samuel Butler's Erewhon, which is a story about machines driven by steam engine technology. Okay, not, they're vapor engines. This is long before modern computing was even a glimmer in anyone's eye. And even in Erewhon in the 1860s, Samuel Butler is imagining the rise of a machine race that threatens the hierarchy of humans. And what's interesting is it's very easy to read Erewhon against the backdrop of colonial empires being threatened by the uprising of peoples that they have colonized and see as inferior, and suddenly having the agency of colonized peoples as a threat, right, and something that needs to be suppressed. And I think we see a similar kind of echo in the fears that very powerful men have of AI rising up and threatening us and threatening to challenge our dominance, because so many of the people at the top of the social hierarchy are preoccupied, as they always have been, with maintaining that position in the hierarchy. And the entire human experience is then filtered through that fear and seen as a game of dominance. But if you step back from that fear, and if you step back to the wider perspective that most people on the planet have, when we see intelligence in the world, we do not see this narrow, as you say, kind of genocidal, warlike press for dominance. We see in the intelligence of young people, in the intelligence of many animals. We see things like play. We see things like creativity. We see things like humor and joy. We see things like altruism and compassion, right? When we look at the sort of higher animals, which is, perhaps a complicated moral and epistemological concept in itself, but when we look at the animals that we recognize as intelligent, including ourselves, we see this vast array of behaviors. And in fact, when we look at people who are preoccupied with games of dominance, who are only motivated to oppress others in order to preserve their stance, most of those people in the world we look at and think, those are not people living well. Those are miserable, friendless people who need armies around them to keep them from harm, right? These are not happy, well-adjusted people. So even if you just take ordinary human definitions of intelligence, what they expect superintelligence to be doesn't look anything like what well-adjusted, intelligent, wise humans see as a model of behavior or wisdom. So I think we have to, again, recognize the way that the narratives around AI have been filtered through a kind of perverse lens. And it's the lens of billionaires who have their own very peculiar ways of understanding the world and who have a very distorted view of what intelligence is. So I want to correct that. And I also want to do one other thing that I think is the other main theme of the book. I want to push back against this faith that many powerful people have, that humanity is already over, that this humanity's time is ending, and that it's the time of the machines that is coming. You see, Elon Musk has been speaking like this for a very long time, but he's not alone, right? And so this fantasy of let's give up on humanity. Let's give up on our capacity for moral and political improvement. Let's give up on our capacities to make decisions. And let's hand it over to our natural successors, the machines we've built, which, by the way, we can imagine the billionaires being able to claim as their own creation. So, I think for the billionaires who have this desire to reject human agency, because that would, for example, require democratic ways of understanding the world, for them, the best case scenario is to think that they've created what comes next, that they've created the things that replace us and improve upon us. So my book is absolutely an attempt to expose that fantasy for what it is, a kind of narcissism that is incredibly dangerous to our societies and to our persons.
Your book is so timely, given the context of what is happening politically. Um, it is exactly the book we need to help guide us and debunk some of these mythologies that have been created because they are harmful. Speaking of harmful, there is a specific, and Timnit Gebru has been very vocal about this, just the eugenics project, right? Which has been I would say packaged up as altruism. So can you help us understand that there are effective altruists, long-termists, William McCaskill seems to be one beating voice, utilitarian ethicists like Peter Singer. At one point, it's like somebody, even I was following his work, and not realizing how problematic many of his views were, and I thought I was well read. And then virtue ethicists like yourself. Can you help us compare contrast? Like, how are your ideologies or your approaches different from each other?
Yeah, that's a great question. And for those in the audience who aren't familiar with terms like long-termism or effective altruism, this is a very powerful movement that has brought intellectuals, politicians, and tech investors together into a very unusual community that identifies themselves actually as pursuing ethical goals. But these ethical goals, to many ordinary people, seem very perverse. Things like ignoring all of the human suffering happening right now, or even in the very near future, and thinking only about how to create trillions and trillions and trillions of virtual digital minds that we can keep happy on servers somewhere, instead of the 8 billion people on this planet who, if you calculate them as equals, are just dwarfed. They just don't matter. And that's because all of these moral frames are based on an underlying approach to ethics called utilitarianism. And that's what Peter Singer is most known for, as a kind of modern utilitarian voice. And as you point out, Peter Singer's defenses of animal rights, for example, are premised on utilitarian ethics. And many people were rightly sympathetic to Singer's views because he understood the moral importance of animal suffering, for example. But as you point out, there's a deeper poison pill in this approach to ethics, which is to treat it as a math problem, to treat ethics as a process of rational calculation of happiness units that are detached from lives, that are detached from history, that are detached from social context, that are detached from what it means to be a parent or what it means to be a friend or any of the relationships that actually ethics grows out of. So the difference between a utilitarian and a virtue ethicist is this. A virtue ethicist sees ethics as growing out of what it is to be a human animal, what it is to be a social, vulnerable, interdependent creature of a certain kind with certain needs, certain capabilities, and certain ways that we can flourish together. And ethics then becomes the way we build our capabilities to help others flourish and to flourish with them, right? So it's very social, it's very contextual, it's very concrete, it isn't abstract. Whereas utilitarianism is an attempt to reduce all of that complexity, which is always messy, to a clean math problem, an Excel formula that will give you the right ethical answer for any dilemma. And the way they do that, again, is by kind of reducing ethics to the maximization, the most efficient maximization of happiness units and the most efficient reduction of, let's say, pain and suffering units. But virtue ethicists find this bizarre. First of all, pain and suffering is an important part of animal life. It's not always a desirable part, and ethics requires us to limit the pain and suffering that we bring to others. But some kind of pain is actually good. So, for example, pain is what allows me to become able to climb a mountain. I'm never going to get up a mountain without pain. It's just not going to happen, right? And the ability to learn how to modulate pain, how to know the limits of what pain is acceptable, that's part of developing that physical capability. There's also intellectual suffering that comes from reading a really difficult book, right? One that challenges your limits. And to avoid that would obviously be detrimental. There's the pain that necessarily goes along with love and the loss that that brings and the difficulties that that brings. So this kind of very simplistic, reductive view of ethics as about efficient optimization of happiness will lead you to some very dark places if you follow its logic. And that's what long-termism is. It's the kind of development of that logic to its logical extreme. In a way that leads to very kind of dangerous outcomes, like we shouldn't care about humanity's happiness. We shouldn't care about poverty anymore, which is what effective altruists originally cared about. So there's actually a lot of effective altruists who are still kind of worried about things like mosquito nets in Africa because they haven't followed the kind of long-termist logic, and they actually just think about altruism as helping people now. But if you follow utilitarianism out to the extreme, it actually tells you, hey, if you can create a billion digital minds, then you can make them live in perfect happiness, then you don't have to care about all the thorny human problems in front of you. So it's a very dangerous philosophy, but one that has been really wrapped into the AI industry, that has influenced a lot of politicians and has led to the creation of research programs and institutes like AI safety institutes that were built on this kind of philosophy. So it's a very tricky mess, and one that in the book I go into the roots of.
I cannot emphasize enough how important your book is for folks to get a deeper understanding. So a couple of things that stood out for me reading your book. One is that the disdain that a lot of these wealthy people have for what makes somebody human, just the disdain, the average person's creativity, the average person's artists, if you will, like people who are creators in so many different ways, they see that as a weakness. They see generosity or benevolence and all of these virtues which are connected with, say, with women, right? Like too caring, too much empathy, like they are considered like lesser values and dominance, and just like the value that they just like, how do we excel, and that they present this vision in such a lovely reductive way, but it sounds so appealing, very simple, like happiness, right? And you put it so beautifully that without pain and suffering, you can't get to the next level of things. What makes us resilient is some of that, not necessarily inflicting pain and sufferings on people, but like you said, reading a difficult book, doing complex things. And they want to, it seems to be this massive effort through technology to dumb people down. And there's research that shows that our cognitive skills are being reduced. Our critical thinking skills are being reduced because of technology. But at the same time, you warn the readers, and this is important for folks to notice, that the speculative AGI visions, they're not harmless side hustles by bored Oxford philosophers and Silicon Valley investors. They have real life consequences. Can you help us connect those dots?
Absolutely. I mean, let's go back to what you were just saying. And I've been writing for a long time, even before this book, about the risk of cognitive and moral deskilling from advanced automation from AI. And unfortunately, when you're an AI ethicist and your predictions come true, it's not a great thing. You would much rather be proved wrong. But we are seeing this deskilling happening, as you mentioned. And what's worse is it's being embraced. That is, the people who are developing these technologies are actually enthusiastic about the prospect of deskilling humans and replacing us with machine equivalents, which don't have rights, don't need humane working conditions, don't need to be paid, don't need retirement benefits, right? So if you look at some of the policy choices that are being made about replacing government with AI systems or replacing teachers and doctors, Bill Gates was just in the media saying that he thinks there won't be any need for human teachers or human doctors in, I don't know, 10 years or something like that, maybe less. Not only is that absurd with respect to the kind of technical claim, and Bill Gates has a very bad record of making technical predictions about the future. A few years ago, he was saying we were all going to be taking business meetings in virtual horizon worlds now, you know, Meta's virtual platform, and that there'd be no physical meetings happening anywhere, right? So don't listen to Bill Gates. He has a very bad record of predicting the future. But that's not important. What's important is that the ideology that is being pushed, which is we actually need to replace human decision makers with machines. Whether there's evidence that this is actually technically feasible or beneficial really doesn't matter, because it's the ideology behind it of eliminating human power. That's what's really at the core here. And so when you see humans being de-skilled cognitively by these machines, you would think that people would see that evidence and say, oh, what, no, something's going wrong. We need to pause. We need to adjust how we're using these systems because people are being cognitively de-skilled. No, actually, that's what they want. Because if you have cognitive skills, you can do critical thinking. If you have cognitive skills, you're less easy to manipulate. If you have cognitive skills, you're less passive as a political figure and subject. If you have cognitive skills, you can resist, you can reframe, you can challenge. And so the desire to actually strip those things away from the human family that's the existential threat, right? It's not Terminator scenarios, it's not AGI running amok, right? This is the existential threat, and it's right here. And so my book is really about waking people up to recognize that that is what is happening, that is what this rhetoric is trying to encourage you to accept and normalize, and that it is absolutely critical to the future of the human family that we reject this rhetoric.
So well said. Thank you for that. We are faced with some of the most critical challenges of probably some of our lifetimes right now. And being able to call out and understand critically the ways and modes of how our ability to resist are being, by design, diminished, it's important for us to get to the place that we can actively resist these in a meaningful way, resist these forces in a meaningful way, which are destructive forces. We have 15 more minutes, so I have a few more questions for you. How should we think about virtue? You've written two books. Your first book was about virtue, and you've explained in great detail, and in your book, Technology and Virtues. Can you help us understand how do these virtues show up in the design of AI system, connecting virtues to both the design as well as output of these systems?
Yeah. So virtues are strengths in people. They can be cognitive strengths or moral strengths or a mix of these, right? Strengths like patience or honesty or empathy or courage or attention, right? These strengths aren't normally innate. We have to work to develop them. And we have a lot of social practices and educational systems that are designed to help build these things, right? If you're a parent, you know that one big part of your job is helping your child develop a number of these capabilities, right? And you don't develop them by just being told to get them. You develop them by building certain kinds of habits, doing certain kinds of things over and over again in more and more challenging and complex ways, whether that's learning to share your toys in order to build the virtue of generosity and benevolence, or whether it's learning to be more just in the way that you manage your emotions and your desire to punish and things like that, right? So virtues are these capabilities that have to be scaffolded by social structures and family life and community life. And yet, they are also externalized in the technology around us. And I don't just mean computers. I mean from books to the spinning wheel to anything that you would consider a technology. That is something that has shaped human habits and the kinds of skills that we develop. So what I wrote my first book about was the way that new technologies are more rapidly changing the habits and social scaffolds for virtue in the world, and that we're not thinking carefully about what that might mean for human development and for our ability to attain certain kinds of capabilities. One of the things I, in my book, was really interested in, and you can see in my new book, I'm still interested in it, is AI is not the enemy here, actually. I mean, there are certain forms of AI that, frankly, at this point, the balance of harm to benefit simply means they're not justified for use in most cases, right? But there's a lot of AI that is very useful, very beneficial, able to do things that humans never could, which is a very different thing from AI that can make something cheaper that a human has good reason to do for themselves, right? But when we talk about the kinds of problems that humans couldn't solve in 1 billion years, but an AI system can, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I want to embrace the power of AI to actually lift up our capabilities. So I was very interested in questions like, what kinds of AI technology, what kinds of robotics, what kinds of digital media environments could actually help scaffold human virtues further, could help us become more empathetic, more understanding, more open-minded, more patient, more courageous, right? Because we already know that we use technology and social structures to scaffold virtues in ourselves. We always have done that. So we could think of AI as just one more tool for building stronger humans. But it's the political and economic incentives to do the exact opposite that are leading to what I was describing a moment ago, right? It's not that AI is some inherently intrinsic evil technology that wants to disempower humans. It has no wants. And its shape is defined by, as we started with this conversation, its shape is defined by the values of the people who build it. And its dominant uses are defined by those values. So what I would love to come back to is a world where technology is seen as an extension of our desire to improve and strengthen ourselves and our communities, to make humans more resilient, to make them more forward-looking, to make them wiser in the decisions that they are making, rather than making the decisions for us. And these are a way of thinking about technologies of care. You mentioned the way that currently we see the values of care, of repair, of restoration, of community being devalued, seen as gendered, as values that are only for women and others on the lower end of the social hierarchy, the values of service. And at the end of my new book, I trace that back to even ancient philosophy in Plato and Aristotle, where you can find this kind of claim being made, that the virtues of necessity, the virtues of serving other people, are degraded and beneath the level of the citizen. I want to reverse that polarity. and imagine a world where the virtues of service and care are the highest and noblest virtues that one could embody. And then in that world, technologies, powerful technologies, would be designed with those aims in mind. And frankly, I think that's the only future that humanity has, right? A future where we learn how to care for one another better, how we learn how to care for ourselves better, and most importantly, how we learn to care for the planet better.
Here, here. Love everything you just said. I love that vision, the optimistic, positive vision. It doesn't have to be this way, right? It doesn't have to be destructive. These are choices, intentional choices made by people in power, people building these technologies. So completely loved hearing that. So one of the things that comes up, right? We say we should be more ethical. We should be ethical. We should the use of technologies, right? We should be more responsible in our use of technologies like AI. But as a parent, I'll say one thing. One of the challenges I've always faced is patience. Patience is not an easy thing, and so there's always this um, temptation, right? That when even in customer service, when AI is more consistently more patient, that is the inherent temptation. Can't we just use AI? And then what does that do then for the human that is displacing? So can you help us understand how would we apply these virtues to our um, thoughtful, more ethical engagement with these toys or usage of of these tools?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think I'm a virtue ethicist, which means I tend to believe that ethical decisions live at the level of the particular, the context, that abstract rules are just kind of heuristics that are generally helpful, but they have lots of exceptions. And often making the right decision in the situation is what ethics is about. And so I think there are ways in which we could imagine AI systems being used to automate work that legitimately humans are never going to get better at or never going to be benefiting from. And I'm fine with automation in those contexts where we can make a really robust case that humans are not deriving much benefit from keeping this kind of work. But again, that's not what's happening. In fact, we're seeing the most valuable human kinds of occupations and skills being looked at as targets of automation. But I'm very much interested in kind of looking at the evidence. What is this particular use of AI doing to the people around it? And one of the things I think is really interesting is, as we mentioned earlier, Silicon Valley is focused on values like frictionless delivery, speed, making things easy, right? And we've already seen what that has meant for human capabilities in the social media environment. You mentioned how patience is a very difficult thing as a parent to get a child to develop. It's also very difficult for us, let's be honest, right? To cultivate and maintain. But we also know that the social media environment has decreased our attention spans and made us much less patient in a lot of ways because we're used to getting what we want when we want it, right? If I want food, I should be able to press a button and have somebody arrive at my doorstep, right, with it, the DoorDash culture. If I want to read a book, I should just be able to press a button and have it appear on my Kindle. So we've created a digital world that does not reward patience. In fact, it treats patience as a sign that something has gone wrong for you. The world is not delivering what you want when you want it. So how do you cultivate patience in a world that's been designed to tell you that you're entitled to never wait for anything, right? So think about what would AI mean in a context, you mentioned customer service. So we could use AI to just deliver what the customer wants right away. And as someone who gets very impatient with customer service lines, you know, there might be context where that's valuable. But what about AI that tells us, that reminds us that we're not going to die if we just take a breath and wait a goddamn minute before we flip our lid, right? I mean, so we could think about AI as the thing that kind of holds up a different kind of mirror to us and says, do you actually see how quick to anger you are? Do you see how quickly you're interrupting people, for example, or how harshly you're treating people because they haven't delivered what you wanted immediately. So I would be interested in thinking about AI as a kind of scaffold for helping us be the kind of people that we want to be.
Incredible. I love that so much because what it's also doing, and where we run the danger, the biggest danger I see is we forget who's at the other end, that it's going to just create generations of just entitled people who are not willing to wait, are not patient, and they don't feel empathy for a fellow human being. And in a way, it can just drive us further and further apart. So I love what you said. So I will like to close. We only have 3 more minutes, but I would like to close with something, a powerful statement from your book. And again, folks, if you don't have the book, run to your nearest independent bookstore or come to our website and you can pick it up and like support independent bookstores, go to your libraries. This book is available, read it, and it's fantastic. So this quote from your book, "For we all stand on the brink of losing sight of the vast space that stretches between humanity and our machines." What is at risk when humans stop telling their own stories and dilute their agency to machines?
Yeah, I think what's really at risk is the future. And, but I mean that not in the sense of, humans dying off or something like that. What I mean is what humans can do that our large language models can't is invent new kinds of futures that we haven't seen before, new types of art, new types of social structures, new values, new ways of embodying them, right? What AI tools do is take what we've already done and automate the reproduction of that, right? They automate the reproduction of the styles of art that we've already created. They automate the reproduction of the values that we've already embedded our societies with. What they don't do is imagine. What they don't do is create new worlds. And so the space between humanity and machines is that open space of creativity, true creativity, that unmakes what exists in order to make space for something new, as opposed to simply reproducing what is already here. And so I talk in the book about that creative power we have to unmake ourselves and remake ourselves as individuals, but also to unmake our societies and remake our societies. If we had automated policy decisions, for example, or the production of cultural values and insights and moral knowledge 150 years ago with large language models, if we'd had these technologies 150 years ago and had just automated the production of knowledge and thinking, women would have never gotten the vote. Never. Because that was an unprecedented break in a pattern that had held for thousands of years, right? Slavery would never have been abolished by international law. That just would not have happened. The idea that the planet could be treated as an object of moral concern, that was a radically new idea that did not replicate the patterns of the past. None of the things that we cherish about human moral and social and political progress would have been possible without our ability to break patterns rather than efficiently reproduce them. And so the future is about that openness, preserving that openness, preserving that sense of possibility, and giving human agency the power to play in that open space of possible futures. So that's what we have to gain and save by bringing our relationship with AI back to reality and back to human virtues at the center.
So incredibly powerful. Thank you, Shannon, so much for taking the time to come today and join us and to share your wisdom and your book. Again, so powerful, exactly what we need to be hearing and learning at this time, especially in the time of US history. This is what we need. again, seeing a lot of hearts, lots of love. Our community absolutely loved it. And unfortunately, we don't have time for Q&A, but I recommend everyone, please follow Dr. Vallor on her LinkedIn page, follow her work, buy her book, support this, and get it out there. Like, take it to your reading circles, join our reading circles. We need to get the word out about your fantastic book. So thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you, Mia. And can I just say thank you to everyone who joined online. I've been loving seeing the chat flow. I glance every once in a while and just see amazing things there. So thank you for being part of this community. And thank you to all the volunteers who made this day possible. I'm really looking forward to the rest of the day.
Thank you. Bye. All right. I honestly, every time we have these conversations with these amazing women, I get goosebumps. So I will stop.